الله خلاقي ومهجة مهجتي حب فدته النفس كل فدائي
ہے میرا خالق خدا وہ جان من وہ جان فضا وہ میرا محبوب ہے اس پر میرا سب کچھ فدا.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Dear viewers, welcome back to another episode of Asma'ullah al-Husna, the beautiful attributes of Allah. In today's program, we'll talk about the attribute of Allah as-Salam. But before we go into that, I just want to remind our viewers that we've discussed 4 major attributes of Allah so far. We've talked about, at the beginning, before we started talking about the attributes, we talked about the name of Allah, the meaning of the word Allah. And then we talked about the 4 attributes of Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, and then we talked about Rabbul Alameen and Maliki Yawmiddin. So in today's program, we're talking about As-Salam. And in the studio to help me discuss this, I have from my immediate right, my regular guest, Brother Fabakari Kala, and next to him is Ustaz Ibrahim Bah. Gentlemen, you're welcome. Let's start with the meaning of As-Salam. If I may throw this question to you, Ustaz, what is the meaning of the attribute of the word As-Salam?
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. This attribute of God, As-Salam, is used in the Holy Quran in various forms, as we know the Arabic language, and it means being free from defects. It could mean without blemish, without fault. It could mean an attribute of perfection. And that is when it is applied to God. When it is used in other forms, it may have some other meanings. Now, when we go to the writings of the Promised Messiah ﷺ, in his book, The Philosophy of Teachings of Islam, he talked about this divine attribute of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He said, then he, meaning Allah, is As-Salam, that is the source of peace. That is to say, he is safe, guarded from all defects and misfortunes and hardships, and provides security for all. He said if he had been liable to being afflicted with misfortunes or be killed by his people or could have been frustrated in his designs, how could the hearts of people in such cases have been comforted by the conviction that he would deliver them from misfortunes? That's from the Philosophy, page 59. So this in essence is the meaning of the word As-Salam when it is applied to God. But in other usages it may have some other meanings because it wouldn't be applied exactly to God.
So if we talk about the internalization of the meaning that Ustaz just discussed, Brother Fabakari, how can a person sort of internalize or sort of manifest this attribute of Allah?
Yeah, I think trying to understand how we manifest this attribute of Allah. I just want to make reference to one of the Friday sermon by Huzur Adba, the Azam Nisa Masrul Ahmad. I don't actually recall which one it was, but he says one cannot benefit from the attribute of Allah Salam unless you have you have faith, perfect faith. And he said one cannot have faith without having that love and affection of the other. So to internalize, picking from there, to internalize this attribute of As-Salam, one needs to first love your creator. We've talked about him already, but you go there. One needs to first love your creator and be connected to him. and know the purpose for which you created, which you've talked about in previous episodes, and also have that affection for the other. I mean, love for your neighbor, what you love for yourself. Because when you look at the definition of that assalam, it shows that Allah is free from all affection, defects. And therefore, we are benefiting from him from there. Now, we may not necessarily be free from those defects as human, because we are not that perfect as he is. So we may not necessarily, but what we would learn from him is we need to love him and love his creation and his creatures, because he is perfect from defect. Therefore, as Ustaz said, has provided security to those that he has created.
So in that sense, you're struggling towards perfecting or freeing yourself or freeing others from sort of defects from you as an individual. I think that's an important bit in terms. When we go further, we'll discuss.
Not necessarily protecting yourself from defect from yourself, but also from your defect. Exactly.
Yes, that's what I meant to say. Yes, exactly. Ustaz, if we talk about the recipients of Allah's salam, what are we talking about here?
We are talking about those who have that peace internally. Because when we look at the word peace, and this let me say this word salam, let me not use peace, because salam doesn't only mean peace. When we look at this word salam, it's a name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, from which we also derive the name of our religion, which is Islam. And the word salam, it is used in Islam in many cases. Like when you are going to, when you have even finished saying your prayers, you end your prayers with Assalamu alaikum. And immediately you finish the prayers, you have a dua, Allahumma anta salamu wa minka salamu tabarakta ya dhal jalali wal ikram. And there are other places also you use this word salam. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has specifically told us, like in the Holy Quran, specifically people who would be given this attribute of God as salam. And he said, wassalamu ala man ittaba al-huda. Peace is destined for those who follow the guidance. Now, when we look at what this means, for those who follow the guidance, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have sent a guide in every age. Now, those who follow the guidance of every age, like in the time of the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, those who followed the guidance were those who followed him. And the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam also tells us that a time will come, there will be this unity in Islam and fractions, each calling each other, each calling the other by names. He said at that time, God will send a person who will be the unifier. And following that person means you are going to receive this salam from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he also tells us, وَالسَّلَامُ عَلَىٰ عِبَادِهِ الَّذِينَ اصْطَفَىٰ. It means Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give peace to those whom he has chosen, that is the prophets. Now when you study the lives of the prophets, they have suffered a lot in their time. But this was physical torment. They have never suffered internally, because in their hearts, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has always given them that peace and promised them that security, with which they were able to take all the burden the world heaped on them, and they never cared. They continued preaching their religion, and until it comes to the stage that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted it. Now in this also verse of the Holy Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, أُولَٰئِكَ الَّذِينَ يُجْزَوْنَ الْغُرْفَةَ بِمَا صَبَرُوا وَيُلَقَّوْنَ فِيهَا تَحِيَّةً وَسَلَامًا. This talking about those who have entered paradise. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that in the gates of paradise, they will be greeted by angels who will tell them, enter you in peace. And this is also what the Holy Quran have taught about those who will receive the peace that is from God. But being a Muslim means you must be peaceful, because the name of Islam itself means submission, peace and submission to Allah. Some people even translate it peace attained through the submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is, if that is what Islam means, then anyone who submits himself to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala should be an icon of peace.
Indeed. This will be the recipient of Allah's salam. Jazakallah. Thank you very much, Ustaz. That being said, Brother Fabakari, therefore, if we talk about as-salam as peace, how do we spread, or whose duty, should I say, whose duty is it to spread peace around the world?
An interesting question, whose duty it is. We all have a responsibility. I think it's every human's responsibility to spread peace. First, from the Islamic point of view, it becomes us. And Islam has taught us to say salam to one another. And that means we evoking that peace to the other party. And that this is to both believers and non-believers. I know some people argued they don't have to say salam to non-believers and so. But this is a prayer that we are presenting, that we've been. So that becomes our first responsibility. But your responsibility to say assalamu alaikum to the other party doesn't only stop at saying it. Because whatever human says should be manifested in your action. So once you have the responsibility to say assalam, you don't only have to say it, but it have to be seen in your action. You have to be peaceful to the other party. And that boils down to the fact that we need to ask ourselves, what is this peace then we are talking about? The salam, when we say peace. Because a lot of time when people talk about peace, they think about security, that component where there is no violence, no people fighting and so. But peace is beyond that. Peace is about you being a complete human. Because without you being human, you're not at peace. So it's more about achieving what you need as a human being. And this boils down to your needs. That every human have a need. And we do not create this need for ourselves. These needs are we are created with them. We all need to eat food. We need it as human, to be human. We all need to relate with other party. And in that relation with another party, we will have conflict. We did not create it. That is created because by our creator, that's part of our creation. And as human, we're different in thinking. And because we are different in thinking, we will have differences. I'll just take few part here, where Allah told us in the Holy Quran that if one party of Muslims, if two parties of believers fought, he admonished that we make peace between them. So when people fight, why are we fighting? Because in the Quran itself, that says this could be as a result of the quarrels that going to emanate among us in beliefs, in perceptions. And he said, if we do fight, he said we make peace among ourselves. So he has therefore added the responsibility not only to individuals, but the community to come together and make peace. Because he added further in that verse to say, and if the other party transgress, he said, you fight them until he comes to the command of Allah. So in that verse, Allah is telling us that if two parties have an issue, we as Muslims, we need to come on board and make peace. But if the other party refuses that peace, we have a responsibility to come up there and make that peace. I think the other responsibility I will add up to who has that responsibility is the responsibility of sending the message. Because people will live differently until they have a common value. Identity is important. And we all have a responsibility to teach people about their identity. Who are we? Because if you don't know who we are, we will act otherwise. If you don't know the values that you stood for as a Muslim, you will be otherwise. We saw people picking guns and fighting. Maybe we'll discuss that later. In the name of peace, calling it jihad, because they did not understand the concept. So it has given us the responsibility, especially you, the ustazis who are teaching, the media people, that you are the one who are sending the message. It gives you the responsibility that when to make this peace, you have to do it in a manner that will create order and not disorder in the community.
Indeed, exactly. Thank you very much. If we look at this on a very broad level, we see that there's a lot of problems around the world right now. We see a lot of crises that are looming in our neighboring region in West Africa. We see the crisis in Mali. We see crisis in parts of Nigeria, in parts of Cameroon. You go further to Central Africa, you see the Central African Republic. You go to East Africa, you see Dr. Congo. Southern Africa, you see Eswatini, Swaziland. So many crises around the sub-region. Can you tell us what are the causes of some of these disorders, and strife in the world at this point?
Thank you very much. That's a very interesting question. You see, I will relate it to one story. I heard someone narrate. He went to a barber shop, and as the person was cutting his hair, they were discussing about God. And the barber said he doesn't believe there is a God. If there is a God, why did he allow all this conflict to be happening? And then that person he might have thought if you give him an answer, he wouldn't understand. So he need a practical example. So he went outside and saw someone with very long hairs and bring him to the barber shop and told the barber, look, there are no barbers in the world. And he said, I'm one of them. He said, then why is this man having long hairs? He said, he did not come to me. He said, this the same thing. If you don't go to God, there will be conflict. Now this conflict, many people think, in most cases where it is happening, people tend to attribute it to Islam. And that is an injustice. Because if the name of Islam itself means peace, then Islam cannot be the forefront of violence. That is impossible. Now these people who do these injustices in these parts of the world that you mentioned, especially for Nigeria, we know they call themselves Muslims, the Boko Haram. And in other parts also, these people are not representing Islam. Because there is nowhere in the Holy Quran that it teaches, it admonishes people to kill and kidnap innocent children and use them as wives forcefully. There is nowhere that this is mentioned in the Holy Quran. So the source of this is something else. And most especially, it is like the Khalifa of the time, the Mirza Masroor Ahmad Ayadaw Ta'ala bin Nasr al-Aziz. He said, this is created by greed. It is greed that forced people to be creating these kinds of problems. And not only greed also, you have others also who wish to have dominion over other people. Now when you believe in that type of Islam, that some mullahs preach, he said here about the ustazis, their responsibility of spreading the word of peace, and in a way that it will create peace, but not the direct opposite of peace. You have some people who believe in this type of Islam that is very violent, like the Islam that cut the throats of people, the Islam that would force you, that will open the doors for you to come in and there is no exit door. Now if you believe this type of Islam, you always tend to try to force orders, because it's an Islam of force. You always tend to try to force orders to do things even against their own will. Now in this age, it is the promised Messiah ﷺ who explained to us exactly what does the word peace means. And when you relate it to jihad, you see that there is no way that a true Muslim would do a true jihad in the name of Islam, and it would be seen as something that is wrong.
Indeed. If
If you read the book world crisis, and pathway to Islam,
Mm.
pathway
Pathway
to peace.
Right.
I don't think we can go into the details now,
Yeah.
but it try to address this very question that you've asked. Why is the world in so much of crisis? And then we even expecting a third world war. And in that book, Huzur, the fifth Caliph, Hazrat Mirza Masroor Ahmad, have tried to explain to us what will be the implication of that if we should go to a third world war. But he underlined the root cause of this problem in that book being injustice. And the injustice comes on the two fundamental pillars, one of which is human dignity, and the second one being human right. I know he's not the first to attempt to explain that. The United Nations was created to promote this. And that is why at the creation of the United Nations, it first says, we the civilized nation of the world, trying to look at the civilized nation to bring peace among them. And later it changed in its new whatever, when they came from the League of Nations to United Nations, and call it we the people of the world. But if you go to the United Nations declarations, one of the key things that comes up is every human being is born equal in right and in dignity. That is a very fundamental issue within the United Nations. Perhaps if I will not discuss that into the Islamic concept much because Ustaz have done that, but I'll try to look at it from that, secular concept, even if you choose to do that, that every human being is born equal in dignity and in right. That's the first declaration of rights. Now, what those who wrote in that book, he said every human being must be able to exercise their rights and dignity and stood up for their rights in irrespective of their creed, color, or religious background in peace. That is what the definition, the presentation of peace will be. But like Ustaz put it, there is this concept in peace building that is called internalized superiority. It says internalized superiority plus greed is the source of every violent conflict. And this is built on the causes of conflict theory. There are so many theories, but there is theory number one which referred to as the human need theory. Sorry, I'm taking your, the human need theory, which assumes that the denial of people access to the satisfaction of their basic human need is behind every conflict. So if you have that concept of internalized superiority, that my rights and my needs are more important than anybody else, so mine should be first. Plus greed, excessive accumulation of things. What you will end up doing is what you are taking is not yours. Then you are denying somebody else the right to food. And then what you are claiming is not yours. You'll be denying somebody else the right to possessing a particular item. And this will bring about chaos in the world. Now, how does it manifest itself in the state level? Because when that happens, we expect the states, the instruments of sovereignty, which we've just talked about in Malik al-Mulk, that Allah is the one who has sovereignty and is the one who gives sovereignty. But those to whom he gives sovereignty have been given with a responsibility to protect the people over whom they govern. If they choose not to protect or act between them unjustly, the community will rise. And if they do, as it is happening in many areas, we've seen Boko Haram and all those things, they claim Islam and so, but there is an underlying root cause to their action, which actually will boil down to injustice, as claimed in that book.
Exactly. If we move on, I'll talk about it a bit. As a Muslim, as people and other creatures are supposed to be secure from you in order for you to exhibit the attribute of As-Salam. Are there ways in which the world can attain peace?
Of course, there are other ways. And the fundamental one among these is one that the Khalifa of the time always preaches. He said, the world has moved away from God. And that is why it is facing so much conflict. But if the world will move back to God and seek solutions in the words of God, they will find solutions. Because let's take for example, like we are born in the same house. You look at the love that we have for each other as children of the same mother. Now, if we extend that, like the Bible tells us, we are children of the same God. Now, if God is the fundamental goal, Him being the creator, and all our goal is directed towards God Himself, then we will not have any conflict. And this is what the Khalifa of the time always preaches. Look, if we abandon God, then we will suffer. But if we come back to God, then we will have many solutions to our problem.
So coming back to God is an important bit. Yes?
We come back to God, but how do you come back to God? Because that presupposes that we have left God. Huh? How do we go back to God? And we need to ask that question. How do we go back to God? Allah has taught us in the Holy Quran that He has promised us. That He has promised us. That who are us? I mean, He has promised those who believe in God and do good, that He will establish Khilafat among them. And in that promise, He has given us a set of things that when Khilafat should come, one of the key things that God says we will have will be peace. See, I will give them peace in return of their fear. So how do we go back to God is to accept and recognize the Khalifa. We need to recognize the Khalifa. We need to hold on to that rope of God. And that rope of God has come to us through divine guidance from Adam to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And when reached Muhammad, Allah told us at the last part, at the last verse of not the last verse of the Quran, but where Allah told that today I have perfected your religion, is the last verse revealed. He said, today I have perfected your religion and I call it Islam. I call it peace. So the religion has been perfected. From its coming up to the time of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we have now got a perfect teaching. And that's the Holy Quran. And the Holy Quran is telling us, have identified many places as to how to go back to God. But one key thing I'm going back to is, He has asked us to be under a Khalifa. Unless we accept the Khalifa of the time, we may not be able to get the peace that we're looking for. At some other parts, He said, those who do good, believe in Allah and exhort each other into patience, that's well asir, that everybody's lost. So all the time Allah is pushing us to doing good. Now, our fundamental life therefore should be, for every one of us in going back to God, is that whatever we do it on that Islamic principle. First, that we all have a common origin as human. Second, that we understand our differences as only a means of knowing each other. That's what we told in the Quran, in Surah Al-Baqarah, that Allah has divided us into tribes and sub-tribes and nations so that we know each other. So we saw that difference not as a source of a fight, but to understand that. And then we also understand from the Quranic injunction where we are told there is no compulsion in religion. That's also from the Quran. That's how we go back. That and the lakum dinikum waliyadin, that you for you your religion, for me mine. Don't force people to take the belief that you think it's yours, because if you do, you are even causing more trouble. Because if you think the whole Muslim Ummah should believe in one word, then you've already created the fact that the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam has given us some information, that I want to talk about, because he has said we'll be divided into about 73 sets. So if we are divided into 73 sets, it's only for you to accept who you are and accept the other party, and use the Quranic injection that says tell. Cool. So we teach and convince the other party without the use of force. Again, I'm going back to recognitions of one's tax. Yeah.
All right. Jazakallah. Thank you very much, Brother Fabakari. Dear viewers, that's all we have time for. I end with the the message that convey peace to each other. The Holy Quran says, convey peace to each other in order to gain the pleasure of Allah in this world and in the hereafter. May Allah the Almighty enable us to do so. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
الله خلاقي ومهجة مهجتي حب فدته النفس كل فدائي
ہے میرا خالق خدا وہ جان من وہ جان فضا وہ میرا محبوب ہے اس پر میرا سب کچھ فدا یا من احاط الخلق بالآلاء نثني عليك وليس حول ثنائي